Welcome to Jimmy's Jobs of the Future. For our third series, we launched in Birmingham with Ben Francis of Gymshark. With our fourth series, we launched with Rishi Sunak in Darlington. Today, we're here in the heart of the City of London, speaking to the Governor of the Bank of England and talking to him about the 4,500 people that make up the bank and what else the bank does apart from set interest rates and tackle inflation. We talked to him about jobs of the future, where the economy is growing quickest, and what the impact of cryptocurrency could be on that as well. Andrew, welcome to Jimmy's Jobs of the Future.
Well, thank you.
We all know that the Bank of England is in charge of interest rates and inflation, but there's almost 4,500 people here. So what else is the Bank of England responsible for?
Well, it's interesting with the Bank of England. We do quite a very broad range of things. They're all focused really on our core objectives, which are, you said, monetary policy, price stability, low inflation, and financial stability. And they come together. The two things, sit very, very closely interconnected. So on the financial stability side, we look at both what we tend to call sort of overall financial stability or macro financial stability, and we are the regulator for prudential purposes of banks and insurers. But we do quite a lot more than that, actually, interestingly. We're heavily involved in payment systems. Mm-hmm. And of course, we do issue banknotes. And we do have, we're sitting here today above the world's, I think, second largest store of gold.
Yes.
So it's a very, as you say, 4,500 people, very varied institution in that sense in terms of the range of things we do.
And what kind of roles are you recruiting for, and how's that kind of changed over the years? Because I imagine sort of data scientist has become something that's more important.
Yes, I mean, that's a really interesting point, actually. We recruit. We recruit actually extensively across the full range of activities and need quite a broad range of staff, obviously. But you're right that like many organisations, our need for data science skills has grown, frankly, and will continue to grow. I don't think we're anywhere near where we need to get to eventually on that sort of front. We recruit, obviously, economics graduates particularly for monetary policy and macro financial stability. Quite a wide range of skills in regulation. We've got quite a few lawyers in the organisation. You can't be without them. So yes, it's quite a broad range of skills. And as I say, for areas like banking operations, payments, notes, banknotes, again, a broad range of skills. We've got people right from what I would call very high-end skills in terms of the sort of science of banknotes, designing banknotes, and also people who are sort of very much involved in the management, production, and distribution side of things as well.
But it might be the case that you wouldn't necessarily think of applying to the Bank of England if you were a designer.
No, you wouldn't necessarily. I mean, I think my own, not that I've ever designed anything, I should say, probably is a better way of putting it. Art was not my subject at school. The art teacher told my parents when I was 13 that there were probably many other things that he could more usefully do, and I think he was right. Well, it's not my skill, but it's interesting. I mean, I used to be chief cashier, so I've been quite heavily involved in notes. I mean, it is obviously quite a specialist area of design skills. So I think if your sort of chosen career is design in the sort of what I might call security, and banknote and security document area, then it's quite a specialist skill because a lot of it involves how you integrate concepts of design with security features and devices, and obviously what is quite a fascinating and fast-moving world in terms of how you incorporate security into notes.
And how do you go about kind of recruiting those people and make the bank kind of appeal to a sort of new generation? Because we sit here and those kind of watching on YouTube can sort of see the ornate kind of room that we're in with Latin kind of inscribed on the wall. Yes. How do you make that appeal to a sort of, it's very obvious
probably
economics.
By not using people like me directly in the recruitment campaign. Old fogies don't get let out. Well, I tell you actually what we are. I mean, it's interesting just to sort of step back on that point for a moment, because we have done a lot of work on diversity and inclusion, and frankly are doing a lot of work on diversity and inclusion. And one of the things that I and colleagues are very keen and clear on is that as an important public institution, we have to bear a good enough resemblance to the society that we serve. I mean, it can't be exact, obviously, but we have to be, frankly, more diverse and inclusive than, like many institutions historically we were. And it's important not just because it's important in its own right, frankly. It's important because, we are serving the needs of the public of this country, and we have to, reflect the public of this country that we serve. And that has been that has been and is a big driver of our recruitment at the moment, which is to say, how do we reach, sources of people that can give us that breadth and broaden us out? Because there's no question there are big pockets of talent that we can access in that sense. So we've been very conscious about doing that. I think it is paying. We're seeing the results of that, but we've got a lot more to do to really achieve that. It also lies behind our recent decision to want to establish a larger presence. Actually, we're planning to establish it in Leeds. Actually, to have more of our staff out of London, because again, it will give us the ability to access more people from other parts of the country who don't want to move and live in London.
And what is the bank's responsibility and aim when it comes to a government policy like levelling up and so on? Because obviously that's quite a tangible way of we can shift staff and recruit out there. But more broadly, and what does levelling up mean to you?
Well, I think for us it comes in sort of at least two ways. I mean, obviously we follow it very closely from the point of view of, as you say, a policy of the government. We're not directly involved in that side of policy making, but insofar as it's having an impact on the economy, then we're obviously interested in how it's going to affect the economy, how it's going to work. Secondly, I mean, it has been part of our consideration of what is the sensible, in a sense, mix of locations for the Bank of England. It's quite interesting in the history of the bank, because the Bank of England I joined in 1985, did have branches around the country, but they were increasingly becoming, frankly, redundant in terms of the way the bank was evolving. And so we moved, not that long after I joined, to a model which was far more London-centric. And have been in that place for probably sort of 30 years now, I suppose. And we are going to, we're going to turn that around somewhat, as say, establish a presence in Leeds. We've got regional agencies, so we've got 12 regional agents who cover the whole country for us, who are really our sort of eyes and ears on the economy around the country. And we are, they're quite small though, I mean, they've got literally sort of single figures of staff, but we, again, because we quite flexible on the accommodation we rent for the agencies. We are planning to, or we're in the process of actually saying to our staff here, given that we've moved to a more flexible working environment in the context of COVID, that if people want to use office space in the agencies, we can expand that office space to facilitate it. And it seems to be actually, there's quite a bit of take-up from staff on that actually.
That's interesting. And why Leeds specifically? I mean, it's got quite a big financial services hub, but so does Bournemouth, so does Edinburgh, etc.
Well, a number of things. We wanted somewhere that has a, as you say, a presence in terms of financial services staff, and therefore will have a sort of, a set of staff who've got sort of experience and skills. That's one thing. We wanted to be somewhere with universities around it that we could frankly recruit from, but also have partnerships with. Actually, you mentioned data science earlier. I mean, that's one of our one of our objectives in terms of growth areas. So universities, is an important aspect of it from our point of view. I mean, we wanted somewhere which was frankly, outside London, well outside London, but could be got to reasonably easily, because we obviously do imagine quite a bit of movement of staff. So that was a consideration in choosing Leeds. The other thing to say is historically we've been in Leeds for a long time actually, and we are we have an agency in Leeds, but we also currently have one of our 2 banknote cash centres in Leeds. We are actually about to close it because we don't need as much capacity in the sort of banknote distribution business. So we were quite, although it wasn't the main...
And is that directly because of COVID and people using cash?
Yeah,
Yes,
I mean, it's interesting with cash. I suspect we're all in this position that COVID has accelerated a decline in the use of cash in transactions. But I should qualify that by saying that the amount of cash actually in issue has not fallen. It hasn't come down at all. So we do face what I always call this sort of paradox of cash at the moment, that we can all observe that we're not using it as much, I think, in payments and transactions. But the amount of cash in circulation hasn't gone down at all, interestingly.
Yeah.
But it does mean that change in transactions does mean that we don't need as much distribution capacity as we've had. And we also had some issues. We couldn't stay in the location that we were. We didn't own the building and we couldn't stay there. So it made sense to close our second cash centre. We didn't need it. But we've been historically in Leeds, so although it wasn't a major consideration, I'm pleased the Bank of England will stay in Leeds in that sense.
What are the roles, talking a bit more about the role of governor now, what qualities does it make to make a good governor? Because you sound like you're in charge of quite a lot of different decisions there, in terms of location in the country as well. It's not just speaking to kind of members of Parliament and chairing meetings.
My kids say to me, "What do you do all day?" And I say, "I just chair meetings, right?" So that's what I do. What do you want me to chair next? Yeah. I think it's very interesting. I mean, I think you have to have, a very strong interest in public policy. Obviously, we have a particular area of public policy. I mean, what would it say, economic and financial policy. So, obviously, it's not just any public policy. It's it's our area. But I think it does require a very strong interest in public policy. I mean, people sometimes say to me, "Why do you sort of keep coming back?" Good question. And I say, look, honestly, what has always, for me in my career, what has always excited me about it is that I think hard public policy is a real challenge, but it's a real pleasure to be involved in it. And I think, in terms of what therefore does it require, I think it is that interest and commitment in terms of thinking about, and understanding how we do public policy. But it is interesting with the bank because a lot of the coverage of the bank is particularly focused on monetary policy, which is analytically, rightly a complex area. But there's a whole other area of the Bank of England which is about doing. Frankly, it's about doing things and doing things well. Whether that be, as say, implementing monetary policy, regulating banks and insurers, operating the settlement of payment systems, issuing banknotes. There's a very big, what I might call doing aspect of it. And just to give you, obviously the current, the best example of the moment. I mean, obviously terribly, it's terrible to see what's going on in Ukraine, but it is called the Bank of England into action for a range of things that we've done within our own remit to support the government in what it's doing. One of my things that makes me most proud about this organisation is that we have a lot of skill and experience in this organisation, and we have people who are always prepared to sort of step forward and say, yeah, we can help and do these things.
But that is it's a great example of just how varied the role can be and what the bank does in terms of effectively we're almost trying to take a country out of the global economic system. That's not really been done before. That's a huge challenge.
No, it is, and it's a very unusual one. It is. I have to be. Let me sort of preface this by saying I'm a very strong supporter of what the government and obviously our allies are doing in this respect. So I think it's critical. I think it is the right thing to do. I think what's happening in Ukraine is terrible, frankly. It is countercultural in a sense. I mean, we are in the business of financial stability. And and obviously our direct responsibility is UK financial stability, but you can't see UK financial stability as a sort of island in that sense. I mean, it is part of a global financial system, and we know that almost better than anybody because we've got these very big, financial markets in this country. So to turn that round and say, let's use the tools to, if you like, create a financial instability is countercultural. Now, as I say, I'm afraid, sadly, because of the clearly unwarranted aggression and invasion, it has to be done. It's the right thing to do. Now, I should say, to qualify the countercultural point, obviously we have to ask ourselves the question sort of daily, is this set of activities threatening broader financial stability? We can't just cut it off and say we'll do one thing over here and another thing over here. So we do have to keep asking ourselves the question that fits exactly into our remit, which is what are the threats to financial stability from what's going on? But we have also been, in a sense, helping governments to say, if you use the tools of, say, economic sanctions, how effective will they be?
What has the most impact?
Which are the more effective tools? What has the most impact? And
what would you not want to happen to us?
Well, yes, and of course you can view it through that lens. Yes, yeah.
And how do you bring your personality, and how do you create a culture in an organisation that's existed for 300 years? Because it's predominantly we speak to entrepreneurs about kind of building a culture from the ground up. You come at it from almost the opposite angle, and you started as well in mid-March 2020.
Yes, it was good timing. So say with a sense of irony. It's very interesting, and it was very much an issue for me when I was thinking about what I thought were the challenges of becoming governor. And there's a very delicate balance in an organisation like the Bank of England. So there's no question that the bank benefits from having this very strong presence and reputation built up over many years. The institution has changed, by the way. I mean, the institution of 300 years ago was almost unrecognisable from the one we have today. It's changed in my time. I mean, I've been here since 1985 most of the time, not quite all the time, most of the time. It's changed a lot, but there's no question that the history matters. And it was very evident to me. I mean, I spent not far off 4 years as chief executive of the Financial Conduct Forum, and that's a very new organisation. It was created in 2013. So I've had the first-hand experience of what it means to have history and how you meet the challenge of an organisation that doesn't have it. So it means a lot to us, and it means a lot that we have authority with a sort of small a that comes from that. On the other hand, you can't have an institution that never changes. I mean, that's a road to problems. So this balance of the sort of the history and the authority, but needing to have the culture change, is one that I think about a lot. I did set out with some objectives. I do have some objectives actually for my time as governor, where I felt it was important that we did make some changes. We did start to adapt the bank to the way the world around us is changing. And that's both internally and how we operate in the outside world. I've had to sort of, in a sense, balance that with the fact that COVID came along on sort of day one of my term as governor. So nothing has been normal. So we've had to balance that. We've had to sort of obviously do that in the context of a world where we've been through periods where the staff haven't been here much of the time. So it's been a challenge, but it's still very much high on my objectives that we do, I say, move on, maintaining this balance between the benefits of the history and the authority and the change that's going on around us.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that we will see a female governor in your lifetime?
Well, I don't know how long my lifetime is, but I hope so. No, really. I mean, we should do, but I don't get to choose my successors, so I can't give you any promises on that front. But I think it's important that it will happen. I mean, there's no question in my mind that it will happen.
Yeah.
And it's very, by the way, I mean, what is important is that we have an institution. There's no reason, of course, why future, my successor or indeed my successor's successor will come from within the organisation. In modern times, the old bank before the Second World War was a very different organisation in terms of how it worked in terms of governance, so it's not really comparable. Since the Second World War, more of the governors have come from outside than inside. So to say there's no reason as to which way it will be, but it is important to me that we have, we develop people in the bank with diversity who, can aspire to these jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you think was it an ambition of yours when you first walked in here in 1985, the sort of son of two teachers from Leicester to be governor? Did you think that was a possibility?
No, I don't think so. No, I didn't, so far as I can remember back to 1985. No, I came here. I mean, people often ask me, why did you come to the Bank of England? I thought it was interesting as an organisation. I'd done a PhD, actually, before I came here and had a little bit of interaction with the bank, not much. But no, I didn't come here with a particular aspiration, actually. I always say I'm somebody who came here, really enjoyed it when I came here and has sort of hung around, as it were.
Thanks for listening to Jimmy's Jobs. One of the ways that we make this show possible is by the partners that we have that support us. They can be like today's, like the Octopus Group or the FinTech Alliance, but also we've done more consumer-facing brands like Primary Bid and Beer 52. You can go to our website and check out more details at www.jobsofthefuture.co. The other way the show is made possible is by me going into organisations and talking about jobs of the future and the talent that is required to fill those jobs, how you retain them, how you attract them, and how great teams are built that can achieve superb things that we hear about on this show. If you want to know more on that, drop us a line at hello@jobsofthefuture.co. We always love hearing from our listeners. And when it comes to kind of the jobs and the economy of the future, what this kind of podcast centers on, which areas of the economy are growing the fastest, and which jobs are most in demand is the data showing?
Well, I think there's no question. I mean, first of all, because at the moment we have a very strong labour market in this country. I mean, it is, I think, one of the successes of economic policy in the broadest sense during the COVID era, that while we were concerned for much of the time that obviously we had this very big economic shock at the beginning of the COVID period, right at the start of my term. Actually, the economic impact of COVID attenuated as time went on. But I mean, for quite a good part of that period, I mean, we certainly thought we would see a rise in unemployment, and initially we would see quite a strong rise in unemployment. And frankly, I mean, of course, we haven't seen anything like that actually, and that, of course, is good news.
That's why initially we started the podcast, was because we thought there was going to be a surge in unemployment. It
never happened. No, it never happened. Now, when I talk to companies now, and I do spend quite a bit of my time going around the country talking to companies, first of all, I should say, and I'm sure you probably experience this, that the labour market is the first, second and third thing they want to talk about at the moment. In terms of the question you said about sort of where are the areas of strongest demand, I would say anything to do with technology and IT is always listed by companies as the area that they find it hardest to recruit in and have highest turnover in.
Yeah.
And I have to say, we have some of that challenge here at the Bank of England as well. I mean, we're no different in that respect. So I think there is a very big demand for workers or people in the tech sector at the moment. I think some of that probably is COVID related, that people are adapting their ways of doing things, and that has created demand for stuff.
And what do you think the future of work looks like in that sense of, from an employer side of retention? I mean, it's very interesting, Atom Bank sort of moving to this kind of 4-day working week. And the point the founder made was that's largely about retention rather than anything else.
It's very interesting, yeah. Well, I mean, I can give you a perspective from our perspective as an employer. I mean, that's so. I mean, we obviously, I mean, the interesting thing about COVID, I would say, is, I mean, we had next to no warning of it. I would say, I think, like probably like quite a few organisations, if we had been given warning of it, we'd have sort of gone into a state of nervous exhaustion, trying to work out how to respond to it from the point of view of the operation of the institution. Actually, we got very little warning, and the staff were absolutely fantastic. They just sort of got on with it.
I was reading about one particular story of the machines being started at 4 a.m. in the morning, and that's always done in person.
Yeah.
But that flipped overnight to...
No, we have to start, we settle the high value payment system in this country. And the staff started up, so the day starts, as you say, it's around 4-ish in the morning. The system opens up a bit later, but it has to be sort of started up. And we've always had, and we do that, the staff work on a shift basis, and there are always people in here at that time in the morning to make sure it's going. So no, we did. I mean, we did actually switch almost immediately to people doing it from home. I mean, I say, look, we've managed to do. I mean, again, surprise ourselves about how much we could do it from home. I mean, we've not sent the gold home to somebody, and we've not sent the banknotes home. But most other things, actually, at one time or another in the last 2 years, have been done from people's homes, including what we call the real-time gross settlement system, which is the high-value payment system, and it's all been operated from people's homes. And I think, if you'd said to any of us beforehand, do you know what you're going to do? You're going to switch to that. We said, no, no. So I mean, I think that's a terrific example of adaptability and creation, and we've had to do that. So we've moved to a flexible working environment, which we didn't envisage. We had flexible working. It isn't that we didn't have flexible working, but we had more. Some areas of the bank were more flexible than others. Some areas not flexible. Say if you're looking after the gold, I'm afraid it's not flexible. But more areas became flexible as a result of COVID. So we've moved to that. We're now in the position of, a lot of us. I mean, our staff are coming up. They're back here, not all the time, but they're back here. But we're trying to. I mean, we've got a program called Ways of Working, where we're, like lots of organisations I talk to, trying to work out, well, what's the working environment of the future going to look like? And I think our best guess is it'll be more balanced. I think we do want the staff to come back more, because I do think that two things that I do think are important. One, I do think, not speaking personally, but our colleagues, I think, tend to say, I hope they don't disagree because I'm the governor and they say it, but I don't think they do. You do get benefits from having face-to-face conversations of the sort that you don't get when you're on screen. Secondly, I think we all face the challenge, how do we make sure that the staff who join us get the same benefits that we all got when we joined the organisation, of being able to work with and interact with people who've been here and learn from them. And I worry about the new staff. I worry about the young staff coming in, who I think for the last 2 years have, it's been far more difficult for them than we want it to be to acquire that knowledge and that understanding of how things are done. So for that reason, I think if for no other, I think it's important that we do have people come to work more. But we're going to balance it. And as you said, I mean, I think the final thing I'd say is, I mean, it is, I'm afraid, because I know people take very different views on sort of the coming to work question, and I get sort of criticised in some newspapers on this. But as employers, we're all having to face the fact that we're having to recruit people in a job market where that is increasingly part of the work-life balance, because it has to be said that organisations have proved that you can do more things with home working than you thought you could.
Has the economic impact been less than you think almost, with almost 40 people working from home 2 days a week now in white collar jobs, of course? Has the impact been less than you would have imagined, again, if you'd been told that in January 2020?
Well, I think, probably yes is the answer, because I think if we'd sort of thought about it, never having really experienced it, we'd have sort of thought of big things that could go wrong. You probably have to divide it up again into one or two parts, or more than one part. I mean, I think there's the impact on the organisation itself. How do you sort of adapt to that, and what effect does it have on the sort of economics of operation of the organisation? And of course, that depends on what your line of business is to a considerable degree. There is, of course, a second impact, which is the impact on the area that you're based in, and the economy that's built up around you. And I think there were, I know, economists writing articles on the sort of the effects of this, and you can see it in the housing market. I mean, probably the best example in this country is the housing market, where first again, I mean, the interesting thing in COVID era, in the sort of last 2 years has been that we haven't seen a weakening of house prices in the way that some people thought we might. What we have seen, though, is a change in the pattern of house price increases. So we've had a tradition for a long time in this country that the strongest house price increases were in London and the South East relative to the rest of the country, and that has reversed in the COVID period. So we've gone through quite a period when actually the strongest house price increases were anywhere but in London and the South East. And I think a good part of that story was the consequence of people realising that they could live further away from work, and it wouldn't be a problem in terms of the work environment. So that's an economic. I think we've seen that economic impact. I think we probably have seen an economic impact in terms of stronger activity in some of the sort of local centres that support, are serving people who are living further out relative to inner city functions. Although I think now, I mean, I was outside yesterday actually. I went out to the building yesterday afternoon. There are certainly more people around outside here than there were. It was deserted for quite a long period of time. Yeah,
I stood up on the tube for the first time this morning, which says a lot. One of the sort of big potential growth areas of the economy, of course, is kind of cryptocurrency and so on. And I know that this is something that the bank is looking at more. And obviously, as we've discussed, part of it, the primary purpose of the bank is kind of financial stability and so on, of which cryptocurrency is not a sort of particularly stable amount. But where are the potential opportunities for the UK economy in terms of, we've always been a financial services hub, and where does crypto play into that potentially?
Well, I think two things I'd draw out on that. One, underpinning crypto is some important technological innovations, obviously in areas like blockchain, distributed ledger technology. And I think whatever the sort of the aspects of this world where the sort of the products that actually catch on are, I think there's a lot of promise and a lot of use being made of these technological innovations already, and I would expect that to continue. So I think the sort of the underlying technology is important in that respect, and potentially has a lot of uses, some of which are directly in this crypto field, and some of which will be spun off the crypto world, as it were. I think the second thing to say is I think it is supporting an increase in a sort of transformation in sort of digital technology and areas like digital currency. What I think is to be determined is, if we are much more likely to be living in a world of digital currency than old-fashioned old-fashioned payment methods. Precisely what form of digital currency, digital use actually ends up being the one that becomes the sort of the accepted norm. In terms of payments, I don't think it'll be crypto in a sort of Bitcoin sense of the term. I don't think I don't think that is really a practical means of payment.
Okay.
But again, it may well lead to things. We're looking at the question of central bank digital currency, for instance. A lot of work going on that, and many other central banks are doing the same thing to decide whether that's the way forward. So I think we will see we are seeing, frankly, digital technology and digital payments grow in the economy, and they will derive benefit from the underlying technology. Precisely what forms of crypto become, the ones that are sort of, survive into sort of, widespread use, I think still to be determined.
And what role can the bank play in this? Because the UK has become a kind of fintech leader in the last 10 years. We've got scale-ups like sort of Monzo, Wise, Revolut kind of based here. And they've partly been able to do that because there's been quite an open sort of regulatory system for it in terms of being gently supportive of this kind of innovation. So what's the bank's role in the next phase?
I think it's always quite interesting. We're a public policy authority, obviously. So I think we need to play our part in creating a public policy environment in which the innovation can safely prosper, as it were. And that's a subtle combination of sort of both carrot and stick, if you like. So we need a regulatory framework that provides people with the confidence that they can use this stuff safely. With safe to be determined, of course, the parameters of what that means to be determined. But we have to have a regulatory environment, and there has to be one. I mean, I am quite firm. I hear occasionally people in the crypto world who sort of say, it's only part of the crypto world. There's a bit of the crypto world that is quite libertarian in its outlook and says, look, we're different. We've created a parallel universe. Well, actually, no, you haven't. I'm afraid is the answer. You're not in that world. I read somewhere somebody saying the other day that, Russian sanctions shouldn't apply to the crypto world because the crypto world's different. Well, no, it isn't actually. I'm afraid you're deluded if you're in that world. So there is a sort of, create the environment in that sense. But there's also how public policy can be used to encourage, safe innovation, because obviously that's important. We can both because we can sometimes get in the way of things we shouldn't get in the way of, but often also because it requires the public policy environment to adapt to accommodate it.
Yeah.
And what I would say is we've always got to move the public policy environment on. It can never stay still, because if it does stay stationary, we'll get problems. Things will go wrong, and we will not only fail to accommodate sensible change, but we'll actually slip up because things will start going wrong as change happens around us rather than being part of it.
Do you own any Bitcoin?
Sorry?
Do you own any Bitcoin?
I don't. No. I'm not to be honest with you, I'm probably not liked by the advocates of Bitcoin, because I have said I don't think it has any intrinsic value. It can have extrinsic value in the sense that people want to own it, people collect all sorts of things, but it doesn't have intrinsic value. So now it's quite interesting when I make this point to different audiences, depending on which audience it is. It tells quite a bit about who owns it. But no, I don't own it myself.
As you've heard in this interview with the Governor of the Bank of England and in the Rishi Sunak interview at the start of our last series, the UK is a world leader in financial technology, otherwise known as fintech. It is one of the most exciting sectors out there, and that's why I'm really pleased that the Fintech Alliance is supporting this episode of Jimmy's Jobs. The Fintech Alliance is where ambitious people, investors, and industry leaders learn and share together to succeed in the world's fastest emerging global ecosystem. You can check out how they help people to discover, connect, and prosper in the fintech community at www.fintech-alliance.com. alliance.com. And what innovation does most excite you? I see you wearing an Apple Watch, for example. So you're clearly
my kids got me this. Yeah, yeah.
Where's the big kind of
come absolutely, completely fanatic. You can never get away from an Apple Watch once you get one.
Yeah. Where do you see the kind of big? You sort of said earlier, technology jobs being in demand. What kind of excites you in the technology industry more broadly?
Well, no, I think there's a huge capacity to adapt and make our working and our non-working lives easier. I mean, look, I'll give you an example. I have become basically paperless because of COVID and technology. So I had a visitor the other day. It's a true story. About 2 weeks ago, I had a visitor. I won't name who it was. They came into my office and said, "Well, you can't be very busy. You haven't got any paper around." And I thought, Thank you. Well, that's a great way to comment. No, the fact is, I said, well, there's an iPad sitting on the desk. It's all in there, basically. I mean, my staff sort of those, some of them have worked with me for a long time, but still sort of can't quite believe it. I think actually, how have we managed to get him to do this? But it is. I mean, I've changed in that respect.
And I mean, do you think we'll ever sort of head cashless on that side of things, or is that sort of so many years away?
Well, I think with cash, we're very clear that we are not seeking the end of cash. Now, the reason I say that is because there are some parts of the population that do, rely on it, use it, don't have access to technology in the same way, regard it as a budgeting tool that they welcome. And I think our job is we always say our job is to meet the public's demand for cash. But equally, we recognise, that there are many people who are using it very little. I've had the same banknotes in my pocket for a long time because I don't do cash transactions much these days. Even though as a former chief cashier, I'm quite sort of, I quite like the stuff. Sort of quite attached to it in that sense. But the times are changing, and I think our job is to meet both demands. So for those people who want cash and have a reason for wanting it, it's not irrational. Then I think it's our job to meet that demand. But it's also our job to ensure that those people who say, "Look, I've moved on, I'm in the digital world now," that we have payment systems, we have a financial infrastructure in this country that can meet the demand.
And we'll just final couple of quick questions in terms of building relationships and building them with kind of the external parties that you've had to do in the time that you've had to do it. You have to have relations with kind of the Chancellor and the Prime Minister. How have you kind of been able to do that over the last couple of years? Because it's been an intense time, but it's also just been physically hard to have those kind of interactions face to face.
Well, we've had, again, I mean, I think we've all had to do things, to learn to do things, without the same degree of sort of direct personal sort of interaction. So, we talk far more, on screens and, what have you. Chancellor and I participate in many international meetings at many different hours of the day and night, where we're meeting our counterparts in other countries. I mean, we've had to adapt and get used to doing that. I think we will go back to more in person because, again, there is a value not just to the agenda of the meeting, but the fact that you can talk to the person from the other country. And we've usually got sort of 4 things I really want to talk to that person about, and it's easier to do it face to face. But we've all had to adapt to that world, and I think we've adapted pretty effectively, frankly, in that sense.
If you could go back in time to one period in history, now I know I'm speaking to a PhD history student here, for 24 hours, just to observe, not to change anything, when and where would you choose?
Oh gosh. No. I was sport for choice. Well, I'm going to slightly change the question, but I hope you understand why. So I do actually read quite a lot, actually. I don't know. The older I get, the more books I read. Actually, I'm quite lucky. And I didn't know a lot about the history of Ukraine. I have to be honest. And I've recently read a book on the famine in Ukraine in the 1930s. And it's absolutely fascinating. I mean, but in a sort of very disturbing sense. But you learn a huge amount about what you see today going on in Ukraine, and the tensions between Russia and Ukraine. I learned a huge amount from reading the story of the 1930s, and certainly, what to learn about them. I mean, you asked me a question of experience, but I'm slightly changing the question. I mean, I came away realizing why we're sort of reading and hearing things said, and what the sort of the culture and the sort of identity of Ukraine means in history. That's why I always say, the notion that history repeats itself isn't the right way of thinking about it, but there's an awful lot that we can take from history and help us to explain what we're seeing today. And that, for me, I mean, it was, I say, tragic. I mean, utterly tragic to read about it, but fascinating in the sense of helping me to understand what I'm experiencing and, somewhat involved in.
What was the name of the book?
It's called Red Famine. It's by Anne Applebaum, and I'd say it's a very disturbing book. And I know there are different. I mean, there are different views on what happened, and I know that the Russian view is different. But I mean, it's both a disturbing book in its own right in terms of the history of it, but it tells you an awful lot about the sort of, why there is this tension and how it's come about.
Well, I'm sure that will be fascinating now. Is there the final question is always, is there a book that you want to recommend? So you've sort of taken that one, but is there another one that's particularly helped you on your journey as to Governor of the Bank of England that inspired you? Try and finish on a more positive note.
Inspired me. Well, so I read. Unfortunately, I do read a lot of books actually. So I'm not sure I'd pick one out that I would say was the inspiring book of all time. I would sort of really just encourage, for me anyways, I find reading widely, and I do tend to read books in the area of sort of history, economics, politics, philosophy. I suppose those are the areas. I mean, and I do tend to pick books that I think have some. Although I think it's important to read widely. By the way, I sorry, don't stick to books on central banking. Just. But although there is I should say, on central banking, one of the, again, actually goes back to the interwar period again, actually. There's a book called Lords of Finance, which is about one of my predecessors in central banks in the US, France and Germany, which is fascinating again in terms of some of the tensions that they faced in what was a very difficult period, obviously in the interwar period.
Brilliant. Well, that is a fantastic way to thank you. Thank you very much for coming on. It's been brilliant.
Real pleasure.
This show is made possible by the fantastic support of our various partners, and I wanted to thank the Octopus Group. The Octopus Group is a collection of 8 entrepreneurially minded businesses across financial services and energy, all founded on the one simple belief that people and the planet deserve better. They are intent on building a better tomorrow for future generations and are a certified B Corp, demonstrating they care as much about the impact of their investments as the returns they generate. I am proud that Octopus have backed this show since the 2nd series, and they are the reason why we are now able to put such a professional show together. To hear more about what they do, it is worth checking out previous episodes with the founders Chris Hewlett and Simon Rogerson, or the CEO of their investments arm, Ruth Hancock. If you want to see how you could partner with us, go to our website at www.jobsofthefuture.co.